that has driven costs higher than any competing nation. No one is more responsible for this than the Energy Secretary.
But I do mind when they start just telling lies and using wrong information and, shall we say, at the very least, very heavily edited information.
So Ed Miliband just walked out of Parliament during a crucial debate on the steel crisis. The same crisis that many are saying he helped create with his policies when he was Energy Secretary. Want to see the moment MPs confronted him with the uncomfortable truth about his own role in this disaster? Politicians rarely face the music for their past decisions, but today was different. And we've got the whole shocking exchange on camera. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. When Ed Miliband turned his back on Parliament last week, the image couldn't have been more symbolic. As he walked out of the chamber, the Energy Secretary wasn't merely avoiding uncomfortable questions. He was abandoning thousands of British steelworkers whose futures currently hang by the thinnest of threads. The UK steel industry now faces what can only be described as an existential crisis, with the clock literally ticking down to potential oblivion.
Steelmaking has been difficult for some time, but Scunthorpe is the victim of a dishonesty that pretends it is better for the environment.
Let's be crystal clear about the severity of this situation. According to Nigel Farage, there were only 3 working days left to order the essential coal and iron pellets needed to keep the blast furnaces operational. 3 days. This isn't hyperbole or political posturing. It's the cold, hard reality facing an industry that once stood as the backbone of British manufacturing prowess. Without these critical materials, the furnaces will shut down permanently, effectively ending the UK's capacity to produce primary steel from scratch.
Ed Miliband and his energy department are the biggest source of disinformation on the net zero in the country.
What makes this situation particularly galling is that while other nations have found ways to maintain competitive steel industries, the UK has allowed its own to wither through a combination of neglect and actively harmful policies. The numbers don't lie. UK steel output has been tumbling decade after decade, with production levels now a shadow of what they were in the 1960s.
That has driven costs higher than any competing nation. No one is more responsible for this than the Energy Secretary.
The decline since the 1990s has been especially precipitous, with output plummeting by more than 60%. Each percentage point represents not just lost tonnage, but lost jobs, lost expertise, and lost communities. At the heart of this crisis lies a brutal economic reality that puts British steelmakers at an insurmountable disadvantage. The UK now has the most expensive industrial electricity prices in the world. This isn't just a minor cost inconvenience, it's an industry-killing burden that makes it virtually impossible for British steel to compete on the global stage. While competitors in countries like China, Germany, and even elsewhere in Europe benefit from more reasonable energy costs, UK manufacturers are being slowly strangled by bills that make profitability a pipe dream.
Happy because I think, the public perception is that Ed Miliband is a bit of a madman and he's leading us to a very, very dark place.
And here's where Miliband's hypocrisy becomes truly breathtaking. The very man who now refuses to face questioning on the steel crisis bears significant responsibility for creating the conditions that have brought it about. During his previous stint as Energy Secretary, Miliband championed the very net zero initiatives that have contributed to these crippling energy costs. His environmental zeal, while perhaps well-intentioned, has helped create an economic environment where energy-intensive industries simply cannot survive. When challenged on this inconvenient truth in Parliament, Miliband's response spoke volumes. Rather than defend his record or offer meaningful solutions to the crisis at hand, he chose the coward's exit, physically leaving the chamber as MPs raised the uncomfortable connection between his policy decisions and the industry's decline. Particularly damning were questions about the Climate Change Act, which imposed carbon reduction targets that, while environmentally admirable, have placed enormous financial pressure on industries like steel manufacturing.
After everything going on, he just seems to think that the UK needs to save the world at the expense of, guess what, the UK.
Miliband's walkout perfectly encapsulates the disconnect between Westminster's environmental idealism and the harsh realities facing industrial communities. While he champions green policies from the comfort of his ministerial office, thousands of skilled workers in places like Scunthorpe and Port Talbot face the prospect of their livelihoods disappearing overnight. These aren't just statistics. They're real people with families, mortgages, and deep ties to communities built around steel production. The contrast couldn't be more stark. On one side, a politician who can simply walk away when confronted with difficult questions. On the other, workers who have nowhere to turn if their industry collapses. Miliband has the luxury of ideological purity. Steelworkers have the pressing reality of paying bills and putting food on the table. His policies may win applause in certain circles, but they offer cold comfort to those whose jobs they threaten.
But I do mind when they start just telling lies and using wrong information and, shall we say, at the very least, very heavily edited information.
What makes this situation all the more frustrating is that it didn't have to be this way. Other nations have found ways to balance environmental progress with industrial preservation. Countries like Germany have managed to maintain robust manufacturing sectors while still making significant strides towards sustainability. The UK's failure represents not an inevitable trade-off, but a policy failure, one that Miliband and his colleagues seem unwilling to acknowledge, let alone address.
Why is Scunthorpe paying almost twice as much in energy costs as in South Korea?
The coming days will prove decisive for the future of British steel. If immediate action isn't taken to secure the necessary materials and address the underlying issues of energy costs and international competition, we may witness the final chapter in an industry that once symbolised British industrial might. The blast furnaces that have fired for generations could fall silent forever, taking with them not just jobs but a crucial element of national security and industrial capability. What we're witnessing isn't just a steel crisis, it's a leadership vacuum. When confronted with the consequences of their policies, politicians like Miliband literally walk away. Meanwhile, Starmer offers nothing but vague statements instead of concrete solutions, demonstrating a pattern of avoidance rather than accountability. Only Nigel Farage seems willing to address the situation head-on, providing clear perspective while others retreat.
That the net zero minister is going to hell in a handcart and taking the country with it.
This fundamental disconnect between policy creation and consequence is destroying communities across Britain's industrial heartlands. The tragedy isn't just that we're losing steel production, it's that we're governed by a political class unwilling to face the devastation they've authored. British steel can survive, but only with honest leadership that's currently nowhere to be found.